My name is Esra, and I am a PhD candidate at Delft University of Technology. I will tell you something about the work I did together with Ujwal Gadiraju on the effect of customizable and evolving worker avatars on worker engagement and fostering a sense of community in online crowd work. I will first briefly explain what crowd work is for the people who are unfamiliar with crowd work. Crowd work often consists of tasks that require a form of human intelligence. An example is rating the sentiment of reviews as is shown in this picture. This data can then be used to label data for the training and evaluation of AI models. These tasks are called microtasks and are often deployed on crowdsourcing platforms such as Amazon, Mechanical Turk, or Prolific. Many of these microtasks are repetitive and boring tasks, causing decreased motivation in workers. This decreased motivation then leads to low engagement, which can lead to high dropout rates. Furthermore, a decreased level of motivation can make workers more susceptible to stress, which can decrease worker well-being. At the same time, these tasks are often performed in isolation. Workers often perform their work while sitting alone behind a computer and are typically not working in a regular workspace with other colleagues. In 2016, roughly 60% of crowd workers were engaging on external crowd work forums, forming connections with other workers. However, engaging on these platforms fully relies on workers' unpaid personal time and motivation. Other similar options to connect and engage with other crowd workers are typically not facilitated by crowdsourcing platforms itself. Altogether, this causes a low cohesion between crowd workers. Although crowd work often work isolated, community identification is known to be an important intrinsic motivator for crowd workers. Furthermore, we know from prior work that a sense of group identification in crowd work is related to worker engagement and continuous participation. These findings highlight the importance of feeling connected and identifying with fellow workers in online crowd work. Altogether, we were interested in how we could make crowd work more engaging. Customizing a personal avatar can serve as a virtual identity, as the avatar can be customized in a way that resembles yourself or in a way in what you want to look like. Prior work in conversational crowdsourcing has found that avatar customization can reduce the perceived cognitive workload and can increase worker retention. At the same time, we know that gamified crowd work can increase motivation, participation rate, and even work quality. So we wanted to combine these two aspects, avatar customization and gamification, into customizable evolving worker avatars. This means that for each 4 new completed tasks, workers can unlock a new level that comes with new editable avatar features. This way, workers can further personalize their avatar in a gamified way. We then wanted to use these customized avatars as a lightweight and privacy-sensitive intervention to support group identification among crowd workers. So we have this gamified personalized avatar that serves as a virtual worker identity. And we also know that from prior research, avatar identification relates to and predicts group identification. So we wanted to use this created virtual identity to foster group identification among crowd workers. We did this by letting workers share their avatar in a work community space, about which I will later tell more details. So altogether, we were focusing on the following research questions. The first one is, how do evolving and customizable worker avatars affect worker experience and task-related outcomes? We were also interested in to what extent can the sharing of worker avatars in a worker community space affect the sense of group identification? And lastly, we were interested in how this sense of group identification affects worker experience and task-related outcomes. So how did we measure worker experience? We've measured the perceived workload, intrinsic motivation, and subjective engagement of the workers, together with the sense of group identification. Task-related outcomes were measured by the worker retention, so how many tasks were completed by the worker, the accuracy, and the total task execution time. We have investigated our research questions with a randomized controlled trial with 610 workers within 5 conditions and 2 different tasks. The conditions varied in the ability to customize a personal avatar and whether the customization was gamified, which we call evolving. The conditions also varied in whether workers were sharing their avatar in the worker community space after completing the tasks. One of the two tasks was an information finding task, during which workers needed to find the middle name of a famous person using the available information, and they could search on Google or Wikipedia. The second task was a credibility analysis task, where workers were presented with a statement from social media, and they needed to classify the statements into credible or not credible using the buttons that are shown in this picture. I will now show you the different conversational interfaces for each condition that we used. Here you can see the conversational interface of our control condition. As you can see, this condition does not have a customized avatar. The avatar is rather basic and does not cause any identification with the avatar. In our basic avatar conditions, workers have a basic avatar which they could customize before starting the task. In the basic community condition, workers are also shared their avatar afterwards in the worker community space, which I will later explain in more detail. For evolving conditions, workers could also see a progress bar together with the number of completed tasks. They could also see the current level they're in, and when entering a new level, workers got a pop-up notification saying that they unlocked new editable features for their avatar. They could also use the button, the Open Editor button, to move back and forth to the avatar editor and back to the task to immediately see the features that they unlocked to further customize their avatar. This is what the avatar editor looked like. Workers started off with a basic avatar and could further customize various features. After completing the tasks, workers in the community conditions moved to the worker community space. Before entering the worker community space, workers were asked to rate their feelings about the task using the Pick a Mood scale. This was done to provide workers a privacy-sensitive way to express themselves towards other workers and induce a sense of group identification later in the worker community space. Afterwards, workers arrived in the worker community space, where workers saw their own avatar being surrounded by the avatars of workers who have also worked on the same task. This was done to create a sense of group identification. Furthermore, workers could see how the task made them and the other workers feel. Workers could interact with the community space by buttons to refresh the subset of workers that is displayed, filter the workers based on workers who had a similar mood as they had, and ordering the workers from highest to lowest level to see the most evolved avatars. I will now show you the key results of the first research question about how evolving and customizable worker avatars affect worker experience and task-related outcomes. We see here the worker retention, so the amount of completed tasks of the information finding task. We see that the evolving avatar condition shows a somewhat greater worker retention compared to the control condition. Over here, we see the worker retention for the credibility analysis task. We see that both evolving conditions show greater worker retention compared to the control condition, with a significant difference for the evolving condition. Based on these results, we can conclude that evolving and customizable worker avatars can increase worker retention, especially within the credibility analysis task. Within our second research question, we want to investigate the impact of our worker community space on fostering a sense of group identification. However, we did not find a significant impact on our worker community space on group identification. However, we were still interested in investigating our third research question, focusing on the impact of group identification on worker experience and task-related outcomes. As there was still a broad range in the level of group identification across the different conditions, we decided to do an exploratory analysis for the different levels of group identification. As previously mentioned, we have measured group identification with the GIM questionnaire. This questionnaire consists of 4 Likert scale statements that are written on this slide. To analyze the impact of different levels of group identification, we have divided the workers into a low, mid, and high group, resembling how strongly the workers identified as being crowd workers. For both tasks, the results of our exploratory analysis showed that workers who identify strongly as crowd workers experienced greater intrinsic motivation and subjective engagement. At the same time, they also experienced greater perceived workload. For the information finding tasks, workers who strongly identified as crowd workers showed greater worker retention. And furthermore, for the credibility analysis task, workers in the low and high groups showed slightly lower accuracy compared to the mid group. As a quick recap of our results, we have found that evolving and customizable worker avatars increase worker retention, especially for the credibility analysis task. We did not find an impact of our worker community space on the sense of group identification. And our exploratory analysis showed that workers who strongly identified as crowd workers showed greater intrinsic motivation, subjective engagement, and perceived workload. They also showed greater worker retention, but only in the information finding task. And workers in the high and low group showed significantly lower accuracy, but only in the credibility analysis task. Interestingly, we did see some differences in the results across our two different tasks. So this made us think, are these different results caused because these two tasks are perceived differently? So we decided to do another exploratory analysis to check whether these two tasks were perceived differently regarding the worker experience measures. Indeed, we saw that for the credibility analysis tasks, workers showed greater intrinsic motivation, also greater subjective engagement, and lower perceived workload. In general, we could thus say that credibility analysis task is perceived as more engaging, enjoyable, and having a less heavy workload compared to the information finding task. Different task features might thus mitigate or amplify the impact of gamified interventions, such as our evolving avatars. Future work might focus on how these different task characteristics relate to the impact of the interventions designed to improve worker experience. Altogether, we have seen that evolving and customizable avatars can improve worker retention, which is specifically interesting for designing tasks that require a longer training time and where it's beneficial to maintain workers' attention for a longer period of time. Furthermore, as we have seen that group identification relates to increased intrinsic motivation and subjective engagement, fostering group identification might contribute to sustainable crowd work. However, as it also relates to greater perceived workload, future research could investigate ways to foster a healthy sense of group identification, with the right balance between being invested in the work and not feeling pressured by a large perceived workload. If you'd like to know more details on our work, you can scan the QR code to go directly to the paper. And if you're interested in what research I'm doing, you can visit my personal website using the other QR code. Thank you for listening.